Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's forum. My name is Arden Cook, and I'm a student forum host here at the Hinckley Institute of Politics. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. A quick note that pizza will be served at the end of the event. Today's conversation with Congressman Blake Moore is the second of the 2024 Sutherland Congressional Series. This series facilitates civic engagement and civil dialogue as our delegation members speak on a range of critical issues. Constituent engagement matters more now than ever, and these events offer unique, uninterrupted presentations that inform and educate. We want to thank the Sutherland Institute for their leadership and partnership on this event, as well as the Congressman for taking time to speak with our campus community. Today's conversation will be moderated by Nick Dunn, Vice President of Strategy and Communication at the Sutherland Institute. I'll turn it over to him to get started. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you for being here and spending some time talking about some really important issues. I also want to thank the University of Utah and Hinckley Institute for being such amazing partners, this beautiful venue that allows for these kinds of conversations to occur, and also grateful to our sponsor, Zions Bank, contributing to help have these conversations with our elected officials and with voters and students here. So again, thank you for taking the time to be part of these conversations. Really excited to talk with Representative Blake Moore about a number of issues that are really impactful for the country. And we're going to talk about taxes, federal spending, and maybe just to jump right in.
All the hot buttons.
Right.
You see in the on all the sound bites lately, right?
Well, it's
not the case.
And we were speaking.
It's the boring stuff that really matters. That's
right.
The best way I think I can describe it.
Well, let's jazz it up a little bit. Let's electrify our audience with why these things are so important and impactful. And maybe to kick things off, you've mentioned before. In fact, you said earlier this year that you referred to 2025 as the Super Bowl of tax policy, because there were a number of provisions in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that are slated to expire. And so there's going to be a lot of debate and discussion in Washington about those tax provisions and other tax policy. Can you kind of give us a lay of the land? Why do you think this is going to be such an impactful year?
Right. So it feels like, and I've even seen it in my time in politics, that it's always like, okay, this election is going to be the most important election of our lifetime. Like, we've heard that before. I think that message gets kind of overused a little bit. The reason why, if you were going to make that claim, this year is election cycle, the fact that that's something that has been a key part of strong economic growth over the last 8 or so years, mostly is going to expire. And so that's when you look at an election year saying, okay, that will directly impact what takes place at the end of 2025 when most of these provisions from this tax reform bill take place. That's why this election cycle is quite important. And my frustration is that you don't hear that in the national discourse. You don't hear that from either presidential candidate right now talking about these particular key policies. If you're paying close enough attention, you will, but it's not actually what captures the attention of the American people right now. And we need to do a better job from every level of government. But this year, let's talk about federal politics, making sure that we're articulating what could ultimately be. There's a really good positive story out here that Congress, the House of Representatives, came together in a very strong bipartisan tax bill that would have been signed into law by President Biden. This tax bill would have retroactively engaged some things that had expired and would have gone through the end of next year, 2025. But Senate Republicans held off on it, right? I disagreed with them. Every single one of the Ways and Means tax members, the tax committee in the House, every Republican was very supportive of this bill, and it would have been good. Next year, depending on what political environment exists, you will have an opportunity to address the 2017, provisions expiration taking place in a myriad of different ways. So I'm somewhat hopeful that there could be some reasonable compromise if you're in split government, right? If you have, say, if you have a White House that's different from the control of Congress, there should be a way forward. We showed that we could do that this year. And then if it's unified government, right, when you have the White House, House, and Senate under one party, you will get a chance. I'm hopeful that that's what situation we'll be in, because then we'll get an opportunity to use budget reconciliation to go after all of this work that we're doing right now. I'm on 3 different tax teams: community development, working families, and global competitiveness. And we want to culminate all of that into a really solid re-up of 2017 tax bill. It will look different. We are in a different political environment. Our debt is far different than it was in 2017, far worse, obviously. So what do we need to do for that tax bill? What do we also need to do for a deficit reducing opportunity to also utilize that White House, House, and Senate? Something Republicans didn't do enough, in my opinion. Many wanted to. Look at like Speaker Paul Ryan. That was his, one of his big hopes was to be able to get after some of this major mandatory spending. That wasn't able to be accomplished. But could we do it now? That's the stuff to look at. So it's exciting. There's a lot of different variables that we'll get done. But the fact that it's so much is expiring is very different than the 2020 election. That's why the 2024 election is, in my opinion, the stakes are higher.
Let's lean into the Super Bowl analogy a little bit, and think of it in terms of something that we care about, we get excited about, we're watching very closely. How can we translate, again, as you kind of joked earlier, tax policy debate that can maybe seem a little dry to some folks, but a room full of students who are pursuing vocational and educational opportunities, as they're looking at their future, maybe just any general comments as to why regular voters should be really enthused about this topic. Help make it real for folks. What about tax policy for folks in the room, for them to say, well, this is why it actually does affect me personally, and I should care?
Yeah, in the Utah shirt, sir, red Utah shirt. How old are you in 2017? Okay, so you might not have been super involved in or even cared what a tax reform bill back in Washington was going on. You may have heard about it. You might buck the trend and be the most interested person in the world. I don't want to make that assumption. What I mean is, 2017 was a while ago. People are in a different situation. So the folks in this room, and I love seeing some familiar faces on the junior ROTC, and I've had a chance to interact with you all on multiple occasions. So awesome to see you. And I've been in your seats before when I attended the U ages and ages and ages ago. Not as young as I look on that photo there. This matters because you will be entering the workforce. You might already have a job, you might be doing some, but you'll be entering the workforce soon. And what the decisions we make now will have a profound impact on you all. And the thing that I feel some apathy is because this bill that took place in 2017 is kind of standard to a lot of folks, and they don't really understand the fact of what is going to expire. So the child tax credit before 2017 was only $500. So Republicans doubled that to $1,000. So if you ever hear Republicans don't care about the child tax credit, we doubled it in 2017. Democrats want to go majorly high right now. So just because we don't want to go as high as them doesn't mean we don't care about the child tax credit. That is a fundamental sort of build families, give that relief to families that are investing in children and things like that. That is going to expire, and that is going to be a big drop back into people's tax bills. If you've done your taxes, you understand what it is to do to take advantage of the standard deduction, to not itemize. Well, we doubled that limit. That threshold, we increased double. Folks, there's only there's only 2 income groups of people that benefits. It does not benefit the uber wealthy. That benefits middle and lower income Americans, right? When you double the child tax credit, when you increase the standard deduction threshold, that only benefits those. The corporate tax rate being dropped from 35 to 21 is a hot button issue. We saw real wage growth take place after that. Companies had the opportunity to invest more in the things that helped grow their business, and a big part of that is labor force. That's the part that I really want to be able to go around the country, and well, the first district mostly, and communicate is that don't look at the rhetoric. Look at the reality of what that is. It did not solve our deficit. So as I'm praising that bill, let me also highlight Republicans didn't do enough to get after major deficit spending in 2017. Right? Now, there's a reason for it. They wanted to get the tax bill done. They wanted to grow the economy. They were trying to do healthcare. They weren't able to. They weren't able to accomplish that. And then they lost control of the House, and then lost the White House, and then lost the Senate. And we got the House back. It's been a political maneuver ever since. But there is still that desire, that Paul Ryan desire, to go get after our major spending items and sort of pull that back down a little bit. Find areas to do that while still taking care of the people we need to take care of. Our seniors have invested in their own Social Security. They need to be protected. But my kids have got to look, and many of you have got to be thinking about, okay, I cannot rely on the current version of Social Security and Medicare. That's a whole nother seminar. I'm happy to discuss onto it more. I'll go really deep in the weeds if we need to, but we can't predict that. So what is Congress doing outside of all that other stuff? We developed a bill, and I think this matters to a lot of people in this room. You're going to take on some student debt. Don't be scared of that. That's okay. Be smart about it. Work your tail off. Work as hard as you can. Value that education. Help limit that deficit as much as you can. But you're investing in yourself, so that's okay. What we decided to do as Congress a couple years ago was we did a bill called Secure 2.0, and that says when you graduate and you have some student debt, you should pay that first. But your company can, on your behalf, if you're paying down your student debt, your company can start contributing to your 401k. You don't have to match it yourself. You can be paying your debt, and they can contribute on your behalf. Companies want to do it. Employees should love that, and it should be a really great thing that your company will offer, and you will start saving for your own retirement 5-6 years sooner than you otherwise would have. So look at some of those positive things coming out of Congress. That had over 415 votes. I mean, that was basically unanimous to do something that logical. So there, in split government, there's great opportunities, and we've got to be able to find them. In unified government, you have to sometimes take a shot at some things that you may have missed on in previous.
I want to jump into spending more, but spend just a minute longer on tax reform specifically. And you alluded to some of these, but are there other things that you would highlight from the 2017 bill that you would say, well, here's what we need to keep from that tax bill, here's what we need to change? You talked about the corporate tax rate. Just looking kind of as 2017 as a reference and looking to 2025, what do we keep, what do we change, and is there anything else that hasn't been on the table that should be considered in our tax policy discussion?
Yeah, so super wonky tax issue that was kind of alongside the corporate tax rate decrease, something called foreign derived intangible income. It's called FDII. It's an easier thing to say. 50 cent. I know, I'm going to get some laughs there. FDII is a unique tax provision that encourages US-based multinational companies to bring some of their assets, some of the things that they've placed outside our borders, back to the US. There's a US company, I was talking to the CEO probably like a month ago, and he just said, yeah, I mean, I hope you guys really understand like the reality of what we did. When you guys did that tax, but when you did FDII, we were paying about $1 billion for this XYZ tax bill that we owed. We're now paying $2.5 billion. And you're like, whoa, that's a lot more tax. You're a Republican. What I'm saying is that was offshored. They brought that back from places like Ireland or somewhere else in the EU. They brought that back and then invested those dollars here. So by reducing that tax, by making that that tax more globally competitive, we actually gained more revenue as a country. Now, it's not enough revenue to take over our debt and our deficits, right? There is not a plan I've seen that we could tax our way out of that issue or grow our way out of that issue. I have not necessarily seen that. We need positive economic growth to have a chance at doing it, though. And so that's a particular provision that, like I said, it's not going to be super top of mind to people. People don't get what FDII is. But big companies in the US that have grown and been very successful they're loving it because they're like, we want to bring it back here, but the tax scenario, the tax environment was so much better in other areas. We would of course take advantage of that. Now that they're bringing that back here, that revenue stays in the U.S. So it's huge. But like I think on a more basic, more personal level, or more community-based level, opportunity zones need to get to that point that the LIHTC, low-income housing tax credits do, affordable housing tax credits. Opportunity zones aren't there yet. The reason why they're not there yet is because it's still a partisan mess in Washington, right? Opportunity zones are very simple. There are communities in every state in the country that are underserved. They have not had proper investment go into them. They are typically, significant poverty exists in these communities, and it's a bad cycle. Well, what opportunity zones are is it's an investment structure that will encourage development. So go to Anacostia, DC, right? It's across the river. It's a very, very, it's just been underserved for a long, long time. I've lived in DC 2 points in my life. It's always been an area that has lagged behind. Opportunity zones, I just toured a structure that is a multi-use retail housing structure. It's right on the river. It's gorgeous property. There was a gas station there before that had a lot of nefarious activity anyways going on. That's the only thing it displaced from the community was one gas station, and they paid for that, transfer and whatever. Everything was done really, really well. And there is now a women's health center in that area. There before women that were going through neonatal or prenatal, they were having to go into Washington, D.C. areas. It would have to spend a ton of time transporting there. There's now a location right there. They're building this retail and housing center that is gorgeous property. Investors are investing in it because they're like, hey, I can make my returns in a lot of different ways. And they have options. They're like, I want to do something good for the community, and I'm still going to make a healthy return. And at the same time, they're building up a building and a community that would have never existed there. And there was an individual who's African American. He's a contractor, electrical contractor. Said, I won this project. My team now knows how to win a project. They know how to build a good proposal, and we're now doing the work for this. So they live there, they're doing the work there, and they're growing their own community. And that's because you create investment opportunities. To date, though, it's still a partisan issue. But I'm hopeful that, and that's only because I think it was part of the 2017 tax package that only Republicans voted for. It's easy to demonize stuff like that. It's actually the same structure as the low-income housing tax credits that get broad bipartisan support. So that's something I hope we can build on, and that's part of one of the tax teams that I'm working on. And a little frustrated at the Treasury Department. They actually this group that was building that has requested the Treasury to come check out their property. Just come do a tour, come do a site visit, come see the investors, come see how everybody's happy and excited about this. And they've been reluctant to do so. I think it's because it was tagged from the 2017 bill, and that we got to get over, right? We've got to get over that part of Washington politics and do things that are really good for strong community growth.
Well, because you mentioned politics, let's just touch on briefly, because it is an election year, the makeup of who controls federal government might look different next year. I wanted to sort of tee up 3 different scenarios and just get your thoughts of what you would hope to happen in DC based on these 3 scenarios. So number 1, if Republicans were to take full control of the federal government, both chambers in Congress and the White House, what would kind of be on your wish list as far as tax policy? If Democrats took full control of the federal government, what would you hope to still be able to accomplish? And then kind of maybe a middle scenario, if there's split control in some form. Give us a sense of, in those various scenarios, what would you hope to accomplish? What do you think is realistic?
Oh, that's a great framing. I'll keep it very separate. In a scenario where you have unified Republican control, White House, House, and Senate, in any of these scenarios, everything still has to pass with a 60-vote threshold in the Senate. And I think people forget that. Folks from my party forget that every day, or at least every time I go to a town hall. If anything's going to pass and be signed into law, it has to pass the Senate filibuster, right? Except when you have the White House, House, and Senate in either party, and you do the Byrd rule and you bypass the filibuster. But you can only do that with budgetary-related bills that are meant to affect the deficit, and you can only do it once a budget cycle. So really, once every year. And I've lived through it in 2021, when the Senate flipped and it went to Biden and congressional control of Democrats, and I've been in split government. So let me just take out the three scenarios. If you had unified government with Republicans, you have a debt ceiling you have to deal with. I think our best debt ceiling that we did was a year and a half ago. And I don't even think you would get a better debt ceiling, because that has to pass a Senate filibuster. I think it would be a pretty standard debt ceiling increase. And if Trump were over that, it would be pretty ironic that our debt ceiling deal that we forced President Biden into would reduce spending more than maybe a Trump one, because he'd have to negotiate with Democrats, and they would have some control there. It's a flip thing. It's crazy. But you have a debt ceiling you got to deal with. I don't think that would be done in reconciliation, because you would want to use reconciliation for re-upping similar to the 2017 tax cuts, and then you would have that deficit reducer. And there's lots of waste in our federal government. Before you even address Social Security and Medicare, there's still tons of waste that exists out there. And so we want to be able to go after that. And then you'll have the annual appropriations process that goes in its normal bipartisan approach. That's inevitable because of the filibuster. If you're in split government, I think tax policy-wise, you could eventually have something very similar to what we did this year. And some of the provisions that have expired are actually things that Republicans put on the chopping block, things like R&D tax, or the R&D expensing, 100% expensing, interest deductibility. Those are things that we set on a timeline to expire or amortize over 5 years instead of in that first year. And that's not very popular. Republicans actually don't like it very much either. And so that's what that bipartisan work might be, is reestablishing what R&D looked like prior to 2017. Republicans are willing to recognize we like R&D invested in. And part of the issue with the 2017 bill was the way that things get scored. You have to have things that help offset some of the cost. And so that was one thing that was put on the chopping block, and we would like to reverse that. So I think an R&D, interest deductibility, those types of things that are very helpful to businesses, small and large, would be ripe for negotiations. If you had Democrat control, it would actually look, I think, very different than when Biden had it in 2021. Here's the difference. Back to what I said at first. Nothing was expiring. President Biden, despite the big talk about changing up tax policy, they knew it wasn't going to be very popular. And so they would rather these things expire and then redo them, as opposed to have to put them on a timeline themselves. So instead, they chose, with their reconciliation bills, one massive spending bill. There was the $2 trillion American Rescue Plan, and then the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually cost twice as much as it was even assumed it was going to cost. Those are huge spending measures. And that's what you saw during there. So I think there would be a little bit of a repeat from that. They didn't get their Build Back Better fully done. So they might want to re-engage a Build Back Better opportunity if they're going to do a bill on party lines. Senator Manchin was literally the one person that opposed it. And it basically cut that bill into a third. And so they might want to re-engage that. And then they would also have taxes to deal with. And that, candidly, is my biggest concern, is they would look at things like taxing unrealized gains, doubling capital gains, that type of stuff would be a really, really damaging issue on investment, economic growth. 1031 exchanges, if you limit it to $500,000 at 1031 exchange, like, you're going to see people reluctant to invest in new property and new growth, and that would be very concerning. I think I think that the Senate is going to flip Republican. This year, the maps make it look as if that will likely be the case. I think it's a guaranteed 50-50 with that Manchin seat becoming available. West Virginia is going to vote for a Republican, I think, without Manchin in that seat. And Ohio and Montana would likely lean Republican as well. So I think you see the Senate flip. The House is going to have narrow majorities for the foreseeable. And I think Republicans are slated to hold that. And then we'll see. I think the presidential election is turning into a toss-up. I think it's Biden-Trump. I think Trump had the clear edge. I think Harris has slimmed that gap a little bit. And it'll be a fun couple months to see how it all plays out.
Let's talk about spending a little bit more, irrespective of the various parties that are in power in these different branches of government. But on the spending front, you've talked a lot about this issue, about federal spending, debt, and deficits. How should we be talking about it as a country? What are the kinds of things you wish were discussed more among voters or back in D.C.? How should we be approaching it?
So a realization of what spending looks like in Washington. There's two buckets of spending. There's mandatory or direct, or there's discretionary spending, okay? 50 years ago, discretionary was about 75% of our budget. Discretionary spending, there's one big difference between the two. One of them, discretionary, you vote on every year. One of them, you enact a program and then you never vote on it again, right? Social Security is one of them. 1935, set it up for the right reasons. Medicare set up for the right reasons. But if you don't give lawmakers an opportunity to actually roll their sleeves up and get involved in these programs, they are going to grow out of control. And if I say out of control, I mean their growth rate is going to increase significantly, especially with an aging population. We need an ability to go actually after that. So with all of the nuance that gets associated with it, the discretionary budget used to be 2/3 of our government spending and is now less than 1/4. And that's the only thing we vote on. So with Americans for Prosperity, they came to our office, they said, hey, we love what you're doing. Because I harp on this stuff, and I can take the criticism no matter what way you bring it to me. You want to talk defense spending, you want to talk discretionary, major mandatory. Like there's a lot of things that are important, but we need the ability to vote on things. Because that was the biggest difference between mandatory and discretionary. This mandatory has grown 10, 12, 15% growth rates. Discretionary maintains a 1, 2 to 4% growth rate. And that's because we are doing a more responsible job at keeping that in check. And I introduced, through Americans for Prosperity, they came to us, they introduced a bill called the Comprehensive Congressional Budget Act. And that would force us to at least take a vote on a comprehensive budget and give us a chance to get involved in these programs. There's a lot of things you can do with Social Security to make it more sustainable for the future, right? And make it a stronger program than what it's set out to do, and that's just in 8 years. The trust fund is set to deplete, and there will be an immediate 24% cut across the board to our seniors. And that is irresponsible to not do anything about it. So, yeah, I love digging into those details. If I vote for a discretionary bill, when I'm in the majority, I feel like we're constraining that and we're doing a better job fiscally with it. But in order to enact it, you have to vote for it. I get majorly criticized. And that's the part, those of you that are maybe constituents, or remember, I represent the University of Utah, so I represent this part of Salt Lake, and pretty much everything from Hill Air Force Base north. I'm not going to be scared about some political rhetoric. I worked really hard with our leadership to use the debt ceiling to lower spending. But what Republicans don't engage on enough is sticking together and being a team. If we're a team, we can accomplish more. There is a big difference in the Republican Party right now. You have a group of conservatives. It's not a bunch of diehard, ultra conservatives and a bunch of squishy moderates, right? That's not what it is. It's a group of conservatives that believe in less government, fiscal responsibility, rule of law, things like that, right? But there's an ideological nature and there's a realist nature. So it's idealists and realists within the Republican conference back in Washington. And as a member of the leadership team right now, I look forward to any chance I get to engage with my colleagues across that spectrum. We have to accomplish something. When we're in the majority, we've got to govern, or we won't get a chance to govern for much longer. And when we govern, we usually are able to reduce spending. And we did that last year. But I voted in favor of the appropriations bill and just got lambasted for it. But that's what I'm here for. Like, that's the part, that's the challenge. And that's why I appreciate folks like you for at least being willing to engage and listen and ask the tough questions. Because I usually get people coming that may be very mad at me, and they're like, oh, geez, your graph explained it to me, now I get it. Okay, I would love to see you continue down that path and make sure to rein in as much spending as possible. And I'm like, you don't understand. I am back there for one reason, and one reason alone. And when my father-in-law, proud supporter of University of Utah, going to the game tomorrow on his tickets, which is going to be fun. He's got better tickets than I do. He said to me two things. He goes, why are you running for Congress? It sounds like the dumbest idea in the world. And the second thing was, can you please, please, please get our deficits under control? As a businessman, he recognizes the real damaging nature of it. I'm back there for one reason, and that's to reverse our debt to GDP trajectory. And I'm hopeful that I can find a way to get after it. That's why I'm so amped, and hopefully, I hope we have a chance as Republicans to do something that we didn't do in 2017, and that's to really get after some of the major wasteful spending that exists out there. So,
I want to ask about maybe a specific example of how to constrain spending from a different perspective. And in a couple minutes, we will go to audience questions as well, so folks to just be prepared for that. But as we begin to wrap up this portion, when it comes to entitlement programs, another one of those large safety net programs is Medicaid. That's a big part of the Utah safety net, in addition to programs like food stamps and things like that. And you've talked about it from sort of
I got
the
on the
fiscal
committee that deals with it, most of it, because of this issue, so please.
But yeah, you've talked about it from the fiscal standpoint. I'm wondering about your thoughts from the programmatic standpoint. In particular, we've had a lot of conversations in Utah recently about this issue of the benefits cliffs, where folks who are on some of these programs like Medicaid, as their income increases, they might hit certain thresholds where a small increase in income triggers a very large reduction in benefits, or sometimes a loss of the program entirely, that can disincentivize their desire to work and take new opportunities. And obviously, if fewer people needed these programs because they were in jobs that led to self-reliance, that would hopefully help constrain some of the growth in spending. I just would love your general thoughts on kind of the welfare reform, safety net reform with respect to benefits cliffs. Can that be something that will help both in terms of upward mobility and maybe be another way to approach the spending issue as well?
So overarching, and I didn't bring this up with you before, we've chatted about this before, and Sutherland has done a really good job on this particular issue. And the governor's team has brought me in as I was trying to get on this really important subcommittee on work and welfare. So the specifics of how it all works, put a pin in that. Overall, the more we spend in government dollars and the more relief spending we do, the more costs go up, right? The more monetary supply you put out there is a direct equation to increased inflation, right? And so there is an opportunity in two ways, I think, to help do what ultimately is the objective. Because you have a really good bipartisan approach to safety net. We want to make sure, and I think it's fundamental to who we are as Americans, to help and support those that have gone through something, that are going through something, that haven't had an advantage that others may have had, and help them get to be self-sustaining, right? That is the goal. And our welfare programs are largely still designed to do that with certain work requirements and everything. But the more money we put out, the more costs are going to continue to be out there, and the more that's going to need to be done so they can actually pay for that box of cereal and things like that. So we have to put that type of stuff in check. So if we actually lowered what we were doing, I think that overall the economy would settle in and things wouldn't cost as much. Not an economist. Did take a lot of business classes here at the U, so I think I'm on some sound footing here. But with regards to benefits cliffs, it is a simple math problem and actually a graphical problem, because you see, gain in income, you have a big drop, then it kind of flattens, you gain a little income, and then it drops again. Flatten this side. You could actually lower what you ultimately give here, but don't do as big of cliffs, and you flatten that part out, you will have people's income rising, and then they are able to more easily get off the program. And that's a stated goal for sincerely everybody. It will require some political will and some coming together and not using it as a political tool that if you were to try to do some legislation that enacted that, then all of a sudden you get hit hard and you lose your next election, and then people will be disincentivized to try to ever solve it. If you say the word Social Security or Medicare, all of a sudden there's already ads written about you. And that's an environment that we're set up for failure if we continue to do that. And so the benefits cliff, if I had my magic wand, that's one of the major things I would do, because it immediately reduces the amount of spending. It also gets people the help they need to get back on their feet, and then it's no longer a deficit creator. We kind of use the programs as designed. And we've had moments in our history. President Clinton was one that he had some pressure from a congressional Republican group, and he signed on to some work requirements with regards to welfare programs. They balanced the budget. We had a surplus for a few years. We haven't had that since. We've had Republicans and Democrats in office, and we haven't come close. There's a reckoning that we've got to get to. When you look at debt overall, key thing, make sure we have a strong economy. Our GDP growth is key. It's important. It's what makes all of the things possible ultimately. So we need to have a tax environment that creates that economic growth. That actually is one of the major reasons we still have strong revenues. But we've got to be able to get after this deficit, because what I look at it as like 10 years from now, we might be in a diminished dollar perspective. And if we continue to run these as high as we are, that the U.S. reserve, the world reserve status being the dollar is the thing that keeps me up at night. I hope I'm in a situation where I can force some change there.
Last question for me, and then we'll go to the audience, and I believe some folks from the Hinckley Institute will help moderate the questions.
I'll try to be a little more brief with some of my responses so we can get to more.
That's all right. It's great detail and depth on these issues. The last question I want to ask you is there anything we didn't cover that you think needs to be top of mind for folks in the room and folks watching online in terms of reforms, either entitlement programs, safety net, tax policy, spending? What's maybe one big takeaway message that we all should have top of mind on these issues going into next year?
So it's a great point. One thing I'll mention is one of the areas that I would love to really get after, and with the start of the 118th Congresses, which we're in right now, that we'll be concluding at the end of this year, we really went after improper payments. Improper payments, I had a bipartisan bill that we did on improper payments. It became very partisan, and it doesn't need to be. We have a bill. It's passed. It won't see the light of day in the Senate for some stupid reason, but we need to look at that and say, okay, there's something in here that you don't like, but we all agree improper payments are bad. How do we go after it? There's hundreds of billions of dollars in improper payments that go out, and it's not even necessarily fraudulent. Some are, but we've got to get that reined in. That's one thing that the Budget Committee has been hyper focused on, as well as Ways and Means. And what we did, and I think this is where the partisan nature came in, is we incentivized states to go and get after these things. And we're like, you're going to be able to keep some of this money if you're able to uncover and go after. Folks, we do things better at the state level, right? And we can do it with a more concrete and more tactical approach. And so this was a unique bill that would have incentivized states to be very, very firm and clear with the way that they went about some of these improper payments and recoup some of that money. They get to actually keep some of it while we put more of it back into the Treasury. Those are the things that drive me nuts that we can't find a little bit more headway on. The Dems, to their credit, were saying that it was going to be targeting individuals that had no fault of their own, been given an improper payment, which is a significant portion of what takes place in this world. But it's not necessarily the reality, but it can definitely be part of the narrative. And we need to do better to find a way to get something done, even pull some of that back or do it a little bit differently, because we do ultimately all agree that improper payments are bad. So again, I'm hitting all the political, talking points, right? Improper payments, tax. I'm like the most boring member of Congress. I'm sorry.
Well, hopefully, I think there hopefully will be some good questions prompted by some of this. So now I'll turn it over to Nick at Hinckley, and he'll kind of walk around and moderate this portion. I think we've got 14 minutes. Nick.
All right, so just a few quick things about how this will go. We're going to prioritize student questions first, and please keep your questions related to the topics that the Congressman covered here today. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I'll bring the microphone to you.
See you taking notes, and that's amazing.
My name is Keith Poe. I'm a poli-sci student and a retired Navy veteran. According to Center for Strategy and International Studies, China's shipbuilding capacity is 230 times greater than ours. They have 3 major shipyards that can build submarines. We have 2. China has the largest Navy in the world now. Is this sustainable? Can we afford to fix it?
Love it. Thank you. That's a great question. We didn't get a chance to talk defense that much. When I first ran for Congress, I said I want to reverse debt culture. I want to strongly support our defense in Hill Air Force Base, and it's just a key part of the 1st District. And then be a positive, sort of optimistic, conservative voice for the next generation. That's why I love coming to Hinckley. I love the internship programs that we do. I want to communicate as much reality as possible. I want to call balls and strikes as much as I can in this political, hyper-partisan world, and it sometimes gets me in some hot water, but I think ultimately it will benefit my constituents and me. No, it's not sustainable. That's why I think I'm really, I'm bullish on programs like AUKUS that build a strong partnership with us, Australia, the UK. I mean, we have really good relationships, treaties, joint operations with a lot of countries in and around the South China Sea, and but we as a nation, we as a military, with China's growth that they're just plowing in to their infrastructure, we're no longer just consider ourselves. We'll dominate the South China Sea. We will dominate that region. We don't believe that anymore. We need to focus primarily on deterrence. I've got a bill that would remove China from the favored trade nation status if they were to blockade or move it all on Taiwan. Hopefully indicating to them a lot of the things we didn't indicate enough to Russia on the front end, that if you do this type of sanction will come. We need to do strong deterrence like that type of work. So we can avoid a conflict, because there's more parity now than there ever has been. So I don't think we're in a position to be able to stop China from what their investment is. People don't recognize that we're in a volunteer military service now, and there's costs associated with that. And we need to be that way. If we went back to a selective service, it would be a fundamental change in our country. I don't think we need to get back to that point now, but those are extra costs. We need to make sure military families are taken care of, that they have the health care and they have the housing and stuff so they need. It's good for the entire community when they do that, but it is a cost. And making sure that we take care of our veterans is a significant but an important cost as well. That is stuff that places like China aren't doing. They're not giving the freedom to their people to sign up to be in a volunteer situation. Many nations, a strong ally, South Korea, I served in LDS mission over there. They have a mandatory service. I'm not opposed to mandatory service, but when people say, why in the world can China spend so much on their infrastructure, their military, their weaponry, and making so many advancements, is because they're not necessarily bogged down. They don't care about the necessary existence and welfare of those individuals. It is much more of a sheer dominance we're trying to promote here. They want to flex their muscles. I don't believe that they want to go into conflict with us. But they're definitely inching, and intelligence suggesting that, putting Taiwan back under a one China policy is a direction that they want to go, and within years. That will be catastrophic for our globe. It will be catastrophic for our economy, and we need to make sure that we're supporting Taiwan as much as possible. We got a microphone right behind you.
Congressman Moore, my name is Ben. I'm a student ambassador here for the Hinckley Institute of Politics. It's not the first time I've seen you speak here. You speak calmly, frankly, and even advocate bipartisanship on multiple issues. We are seeing an election cycle, and whether it is politically advantageous to subscribe to certain rhetoric is definitely up for debate now. How do you see the GOP evolving after this election? In terms of rhetoric, should the Democrats win, or the opposite happens?
Okay, yeah, great. Sir, and I also apologize. Thank you for your service. And again, to those of you that are interested in it, it's amazing. So I failed to mention that as I started to get into the nuts and bolts of the South Pacific. But yeah, it's amazing. I got to speak at an event Friday night. I think, at least for Cache Valley, in 2004, the Allred family lost their son in Iraq. It was one of the first for the Cache County of casualties, and that family has been doing scholarships for various people for 20 years now. It's a neat thing. So there's so much good that comes out of it. Rhetoric's here to stay. I hate to say it. Cable news gets way too much revenue, gets too much interest off of political rhetoric. Individual members of Congress are so incented to hype up their own social media profiles and things like that to create more and more stir. And it's really unfortunate. So I wish I could answer your question and say, oh, the rhetoric's going to totally subside like November 6th, and we're going to be hunky-dory, we're going to be policy-based. It's not going to happen. Like, it is here to stay. What you've got to hope for and what you need to look at is your member of Congress that represents you. Are they based only in attention-getting schemes, or they truly care about directing policy in the right way forward? I don't shy away from talking about how I'm supportive of something that's bipartisan, right? Because I cannot exist in this world unless I'm able to accomplish something. And in order to accomplish something, it has to pass the Senate filibuster. That's just a reality. And I want to have as much influence over that process to be able to get the right type of what I believe should be conservative legislation moving forward. And so that's kind of what I hope for. As I look past the election cycle, there should be a lessening of it after November 5th. I mean, it's gonna be hotly contested, and I think that's gonna be every 2 years, whether it's midterm elections or a presidential year. We just we need to settle in on whatever happens and figure out what's the best path forward. This expiry of these tax provisions are coming regardless of who wins in November, and we need to make sure that we don't have a $4.3 trillion tax increase on American families and workers once that 2025 year comes to a close. That would be catastrophic if we're not able to accomplish kind of something. So I can really only say that I'll control my own communication and strongly communicate what I support. But also not engage in cheap shots and rhetoric that I think is just kind of harmful to who I am as a person, and like doesn't give the reality to my constituents. I see a day-to-day in Congress that's very different than what I see portrayed outwardly, particularly like on cable news media from either side. It's not the reality of what's going on. And I hope to be able to kind of lessen that, because I do not envy you all for going through what you go through and for trying to figure out what's truthful, what's factual, what's not. Like for example, I love that Zuck just admitted what happened 3 years ago. It's too late, but the fact that he did it during a pretty hotly contested presidential election cycle, it's also good, right? Like, he was willing to admit it. They were asked by the Biden administration to suppress suppress information or keep things from boiling up or bubbling up to being well known. And he said it was wrong, and I regret it. Like, I love that kind of honesty. No matter if I think it's too late, I love that kind of honesty, and hopefully we can learn a lesson from it.
All right, we have time for one more question, and we can go right here.
I'll answer you.
Hello, my name is Ania Hungerford, and I'm a student here at the U, minoring in political science. I was just wondering, you mentioned that a poverty suburban area is currently undergoing construction and gentrification to bring this new community to life in the outskirts of Washington, D.C. Do you think that even with the affordable housing tax credits provided for these new homes being built, that the cost of living will remain the same for others in the surrounding area? I've noticed that that's tend to be a problem in the past.
Yeah, cost of living is continuing to go up. We're putting some Band-Aids on some things, but we have to get inflation under control, right? And that goes back to what I mentioned. Big overarching issue is the more government, the more federal spending we put out, the more that just creates a system where everything else costs more. And there's ways to avoid that, and we need to do a better job of avoiding that. I have a bill related to military housing. So there's a quota that every state gets for LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit. My bill would carve out 15 miles approximately, I think, don't quote me on the number of miles, near and around a major military base to be able to do the same type of work, create and develop new housing opportunities for military members. Industry likes it. Mayors and communities like it because they aren't overloaded with so much congestion and airmen bunking up 3 to 4 to a 1-bedroom apartment, and it creates more of that opportunity. And the unique thing about it won't take away from each state's quota, right? And so there's a lot of good that can kind of come out of that, but that's a very targeted, specific issue. This thing that you mentioned about the outskirts of Washington, D.C., also very targeted. And it's an improvement. Is it going to solve cost of living? Absolutely not. But it definitely helps, and it definitely gives new opportunities to people to grow their business. And investment is key to sustainable growth. And that's why I love opportunity zones. And I think there's a lot of good that either side of the aisle can see from this. And once people are intellectually honest and could take it on a case-by-case basis, they will see the benefit of opportunity zones.
That is our time for today. Congressman Moore, thank you for sharing your time and insights with all of us. And thanks again to Hinckley Institute here at the University of Utah and our sponsor, Zions Bank, for the Congressional series. And thanks to all of you in the room and those in the online audience and for spending some of your time with us talking about really important issues.
Even if it was required for class credit. I appreciate you showing up.
Especially that. Thank you.
All right, thank you all for coming today. There will be some pizza for those who are a little bit hungry on their way out, so grab some.